Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Skyler, and it is my greatest honor to moderate today's session with our esteemed guest speaker, Mrs. Ponsi Trivisvavet. Ponsi Trivisvavet is the CEO and director at Inari, the biotech seed design company. Inari takes a nature-positive approach to unlock the full potential of the seed towards transforming the global food system. Under Ms. Trivisvavet's leadership, Inari has truly become a unicorn in the AgTech space, having reached a $1.2 billion valuation during its latest Series D fundraise. Prior to her work at Inari, Ponsi also was president of Syngenta Seeds North America and held a position at McKinsey & Company. For members of the audience, please feel free to submit any questions into the Q&A section as the session progresses. Towards the end of our session, our team will select some of your questions to directly ask Ponsi. And now I would like to turn the floor over to Ponsi for some opening remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much, Skyler, for the invitation here. So I'm honored to be here. What I would like to start off is to introduce myself, and then we'll take it from there. So just a little bit of flavor in terms of what I'm doing right now. As Skyler said, that I'm a CEO at Inari. So exactly what we do at Inari is, how do we unlock the full potential of little unsung hero, which we call them seeds, right? It's little, it's tiny, but it's at the very beginning of any food, any value chain of the food, right? So how do we unlock that? So I'll give you an example of these little seeds of corn. Even though it's simple, it is actually genetically, it's much more complex than human genome. So what we do at Inari here is, how do we use technology to essentially unlock it and then bring it to life, have products that has a major positive outcome, meaning take less of the water, take less of the chemical fertilizer, and then use less land. So that's essentially what we do at Inari here.
Yeah, Ponsi, thank you so much for explaining this AgTech, explaining Inari and seed design. I guess jumping straight into questions, I guess the first natural question is, of all possible industries, why AgTech?
The reason why it's AgTech, I'll use the first one first. It's agriculture. Personally, for me, the way that I grew up is, how do you actually create impact? How do you actually pay it forward? That's how I was brought up. And the question becomes then, yes, I did not start my career in agriculture. I was somewhere else. I was looking for something that anywhere that I could create impact. And then I came to have an experience, started to get into the agriculture much more around the early part of 2000. So roughly, I think it's roughly around 2002, just started to actually have the experience there. And that is something that once you get in, it's hard to get out. You just fall in love with agriculture because you can create impact. And for me, it started off with the impact to the farmers. And it's not about the farmers themselves, but it's the community of the farmers. Whatever that you could create the impact on the farm, it would have an impact to the profitability on farm and the community that could be even better in terms of education and other things in that community. So that's the part that I fall in love with agriculture. And you add the word tech into it. So it's a beauty of, how do you actually work and touch the technology and the innovation. So you get the beauty of both worlds. From me personally, I love technologies, but you can use technology to create impact. So what else that you want to do in your life? That's the question that I ask myself, right? It's just so beauty to touch the newest thing in the world, and then just crack it out. How do you create impact and see the outcome in a short period of time? And that's the reason why it's AgTech.
Yes, definitely, especially that hammering in on the idea of impact. Obviously, you've created such a massive impact in the AgTech space. And as a trailblazer for women in AgTech, what are some of the most memorable challenges that you've overcome while striving to create this impact? And what lessons would you share with the next generation, especially regarding women empowerment?
Right. That's a deep question, and I'll share back the memorable one probably back 9 years ago. So I started to come back to the US in terms of work, and with that role, I had to go see the customers. This time, I had to lead it in the front with that role. Or before that, yes, of course, I came to visit customers, meaning farmers and seed companies all the time, but you are not really on the front line, like really leading it. And that role, I was leading the whole operations of the US and had to go see the customers for the first time. I was nervous, and it was figuring out as I was the first female leader of the whole North America at Syngenta back then. So I was figuring out, how do I actually talk to all these customer male dominant industry, arguably. So how do I do that? What kind of tone that I should put in? How do I replicate exactly what male would do? So that was I was preparing. And then walking into this, I have it in my head clearly, walking into that particular meeting with more than 15 customers, meaning leading seed companies there. And then I was actually, these are independent seed companies. I was trying to actually blend in, and I was struggling. Because I was pretending to be someone else that I'm not, right? And then suddenly I got a couple of family members of those seed companies. These are the wives of the owners, and in fact, some of them are the owners themselves. And we started to get into it, and I got relaxed a bit more. And then, in fact, I just started to actually talk about who I am and then what I want to do, and started to get into sharing the perspective of how I bring my son to get to know the agriculture and all sort of things, right? I share a lot of story, and suddenly I just fall in love with it more and more. And the learning for me from there is I was trying too much to be someone else, and in fact, being yourself. Don't change. Use your strength. Use who you are as a woman, as an Asian woman. People want to know me as a person. Mm-hmm. People don't want to know me because of the not because of I want to be someone else. And since then, it was great every time I go there. And now we still keep in touch, right? We still share like where our kids are, what our kids are doing, where our kids are going, and so on. So it's kind of something that it was hard at the beginning. I just go with that and then learn from the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a very, very powerful insight for all of our audiences. So I think transition a little bit from like the frontline work, talking to farmers, talking to the seed companies. Let's go in a little bit into Inari's product and vision. So at the World Bank Group's inaugural Women AgTech webinar this past March, you declared that Inari's mission was to help catalyze transformation of the global food system and put it on a truly sustainable path. So for members of the audience who might not really be familiar with Inari and AgTech, could you please share at a really high level what Inari is doing to create a more sustainable future for the global food system?
Yeah. So if I could explain it in two parts, what Inari is doing. First part is, let me explain a bit of the technologies, and then I'll come back to the products. So the purpose, as I mentioned earlier, that everything that we do is about how do we create nature positive outcome. So the technology that we're working on, we work on the two platforms. We explain it in the analogy of the software and the hardware. So the software, some people call it machine learning, Some people call it artificial intelligence. We call it predictive design. So what it means is because of these little seeds are extremely complex in terms of genome, what we do here is we use the data science to truly understand the genome, go down to the level of genes, go down to the level of sequence, go down to the level of protein to really understand what are these elements that would impact the phenotype of the crop. So if we make adjustment and turn certain expression of this, how would it impact the look and feel of it? Or in other words, we essentially create a blueprint. So the blueprint whereby the blueprint itself is not only at the level of county, but go down to the level of, if you combine this street in the south together with northwest, it would have the impact of the root of the corn that can consume the water better. So that's the whole predictive design. That's one. So the second part that we do, we call it hardware, but what it is the multiplex gene editing. So we have the toolbox, which essentially does the expression of the genes to be better. So for example, this particular toolbox could make the crop to essentially shorter, so the farmers don't have to fly the airplane to spray the fertilizer, but could do in furrow. So therefore you use less of chemical fertilizer. So those kind of the multiplex gene editing. So we combine the software and hardware together in order to create three types of products. For us, one is to radically increase productivity so we can use less land. Second one, we have the goal to bring down 40% of the water usage. And the third one is to bring down the 40% of the chemical nitrogen fertilizer in terms of the usage there. So that's essentially what we talk about. The impact has to be big enough, and we have to use the technology that never actually push it to the level of what I'm talking about before. Just to give example to the audience here, that seed industry over the past 30 years, the industry is able to improve the productivity in less than 1% yield increase a year, with more than $2 billion spent per year. And on average, taking roughly 10 years to come up with one variety. So that's how heavy it is. And we're trying to change that. And how do we make it faster, cheaper, and then much better performance? Because this is really coming back to the beginning of the value chain of the food system. So how do we actually set the tone of the food system? Because it will set the tone of what kind of resources that you need, set the tone of what the productivity and nutrition of the crop would be.
Yeah, there's so much stuff in there. Faster, cheaper, better, less water, less carbon. So as more of a STEM nerd, I want to go a little bit into the tech side a little bit more. So you mentioned the multiplex gene editing system that Inari is unique for. And of course, that's one of the crucial parts of the seed design platform. So why is this breakthrough itself so industry disruptive, and what are its implications?
Yeah, so the reason why it is extremely critical, going back to the little seed again, as the genome is so complex. So what does it mean? What it means is, if we want to really change the performance of the product, it is impossible to touch only one gene, right? One gene is not going to solve the problem of yield. One gene is not going to solve the problem of water. One gene is not going to solve the problem of chemical fertilizer. So all of these are complex traits. So therefore, having the multiplex gene editing is the way to look at all the interactions of these genes and then get into the right number of genes and how predicted how it's going to become. That's why it's extremely critical. And on top of that's the multiplex part. Then the question about gene editing is, it is something that is very precise, combined it with the predictive design. So you plan in advance where you would like to express the crop rather than just randomly just cross it. And then you would actually not putting it in advance where you would like to make the changes.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. These are definitely a lot of factors that most of us would never have thought about. And it's just innovation. So I think, of course, with innovation, there will always be someone talking back to it, right? So when many people hear about like gene editing in the context of agriculture, they immediately think of GMOs or genetically modified organisms. So I guess this is a two-part question. First of all, are Inari seeds GMOs? And if not, why are they any different?
Yeah, I'll take a bit of time about this question to explain a little bit. So what's the difference between gene editing and GMO? GMO is about inserting the foreign gene into the crop, right? So what it means is, for example, you insert the bacteria into the corn, so then it becomes tolerant to insect, for example, or certain herbicide. So you insert a foreign gene, whereby gene editing is actually what we do is that we touch the natural gene. When we edit corn, we touch only corn species. When we edit soybeans, we touch only soybean species. So going back to the GMO first. So what does it mean when you insert the foreign gene in? Number one, because it's foreign gene, the regulatory timeline is rather long because you have to actually prove that there's no impact to the environment. So that's why on average to have one GMO product, it takes 15 years. Second, because you put in the foreign gene, you can deal it with only one gene at a time, right? So therefore, you have heard about the GMO of insect control, GMO of herbicide tolerance, but you never heard of GM nitrogen use efficiency or the GM yield because it doesn't exist. Because you have to deal with multiple genes with what I just referred back to your previous question. These are the complex problems, the yield, the nitrogen. So therefore it limits the usage of what GMO could do. Versus gene editing, you can deal with multiple, you deal with the natural genes. So you can deal with multiple genes at the same time. Right. So that's the second difference there. So pretty much therefore, you hear pretty much mainly insect and weed control when it comes to GMO. So coming back to gene editing on the piece of these natural genes and ability to touch on several genes at the same time. And on top of those, the beauty of the gene editing is you don't actually have to do only about taking out the genes or inserting the natural gene. You could also do, which Inari is focusing on, that is, how do you express the gene to do more? So you think about it as dimming the light, not only turning on and off, but dimming the light there, dimming the switch. So that's the beauty of the gene editing. So what Inari is doing is that particular, what I was talking about, multiple gene editing, try to actually look at the expression of the gene there. So that's essentially what we are doing. Hopefully that answers your question, Skyler.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's so think about this from like a more non-tech perspective. It's controlling, you simply have more things you can control, right? And you can control them to a higher degree. And I think my natural follow-up to this would be, for many people in our audience who might not be too familiar with gene editing in general, they might see all this as like laboratory created plants or laboratory altered plants, and might have some predispositions towards it. So for people in our audience who might be hesitant to embrace any sort of genetically edited food, what would you say to such individuals?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. One is the benefits of what we are trying to solve here. We're trying to solve the global food system here. And when we talk about the global food system, what we meant is we all want to feed the world, right? but we're going to need to actually take care of the environment, and we have to actually provide profitability to the farmers and community. The second part of the environment one, it's an extremely important innovation. These technology would unlock the piece whereby how do you take less water, how do you take less chemical nitrogen fertilizer that cause runoff into the water, and then how do you actually use much so of the less land. And if I could ask for you to help wear the public hat to look for what we could do in terms of the environmental impact in order to take care of that. How do we leverage the innovation the most? That would be one. The second piece that I would like to talk about is this piece of the gene editing, the natural genes that we are talking about here. We have just one lifetime, meaning that these can happen by nature. What we are doing at the natural gene, it just takes longer, and we have only one lifetime here to solve the problem of the environment. We don't have 5 lifetimes or 10 lifetimes. So how do you actually use the innovation to address the problem of the global food system? So all those things that I was talking about, it can be happened by nature. We help accelerate it.
Mm-hmm. So the key point here is everything's nature. We're just speeding it up here. We're
Correct.
just mm-hmm.
Correct.
And so Ponsi, you really hammered in on the point of like, this is for the global food system. This is for the farmer community. So on that note, pivoting from the product a little bit towards more of the user base, part of Inari's corporate vision is to democratize access to seed technology for all farmers around the world. So could you first walk us through like what initiatives is Inari taking to ensure that everyone has access so that we can actually create global impact?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to share that we are still pretty young company, right? We are 4.5 years old. So we are pretty much operating in the US at the moment. Yes, we do have a plan to go into other parts of the world. And when we said that we want to make sure that everyone gets access to the seeds as we expand, is the way that we develop our go-to-market model. Mm-hmm. So we don't go directly to the farmers. So we go through independent seed companies. And the rationale of that is independent seed companies are working right next to the growers. Some of them are the farmers themselves. And being able to go in with leveraging the insights, the knowledge of independent seed companies, the footprint that they already have, allow us to go into the footprint of the farmers much faster and much deeper into every part of the world. So there are roughly around 60 of them in the US in terms of independent seed companies. There are roughly around 300 or so globally. So these are the people that work US. Some of them are in just one state. Some of them are in a couple of states, but they go into every single part of where the farmers are. So that's essentially the go-to-market model. Is just so critical that how do we make sure that we every single farmers would have the access. It doesn't have to be Inari ourselves. We should make sure that when we look at the food system challenge, everyone plays the role. It's just not one person who will dominate and will win. The only reason why food system can win is everybody works together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So focusing on a little bit, you mentioned the idea of working not directly to the farmer, but the independent seed producer. So of course, like we've all heard of big agriculture, right? We've heard of these massive corporatized, basically like farming factories. So how would you characterize the difference between Inari's approach and let's say like just general massive corporatized farming? And what advantages does Inari's approach have over the more corporate side of things?
So for us is with the benefit there is not only about being able to get to every part of the farmers, but also we treat the seed companies as our partners. They're not our customers per se. They are our partners in a way that they work with the farmers. The benefit of that is when you treat somebody as partner, in the case of us, we take the feedback back. How does the product work in the field? So we could go back into our research and development, get the data back, get the knowledge back, get the comment back, so that we can actually nominate the natural gene better. So, okay, this field operates like this, and these are the things that the farmers want. So we use it as a partner, so you can have the feedback loop and improve the products on this. The product development is not a straight line anymore. The product development is a circle, right? So you always get the feedback loop, which is the most critical thing. And going back to my predictive design comment earlier, that's actually the most distinctive part, right? So the real value is from there, right? How do you get the knowledge up exactly where you need to express the gene more?
So Ponsi, I think I'm really interested in the concept of the feedback loop, right? So are there any is there a memorable example of or is there a memorable sequence of changes if you're willing to share about this? Let's say for one crop where the farmers gave you a really interesting insight that helped you improve your product?
So the part that we for example, corn, we come up with the product concept, which I won't be able to go into detail there. The product concept, the first one, and we had a prototype out, and we thought that this prototype, we need to combine 3 levers together. So which would take a bit longer to combine all 3 levers. So because we use the independent seed companies as real partner, in fact, they were telling us is, no, do not launch the product that combine 3 levers. Please do it one by one, because it takes some time for the farmers to adjust the agronomic practice. And therefore, could you actually introduce one lever, the 3 levers in parallel, and then the next product would be combination of lever 1 and lever 2. So how do you actually go about it? That's the other example of it, because we thought that we have technology, then why don't we just go for radical change, boom, just like that, right? Said, oh, by the way, think about the ability to adopt. So you have to go step by step, and that's extremely important for us, right? So that's the kind of example why the feedback loop is so related to the way that we develop the product.
No, yeah, that's really powerful, because I only thought about it in terms of technology, and the seed companies also give you the idea of deployment and making it accessible. So yeah, that's just really, really cool. And I think going more into the farmers, I know that Inari currently focuses on, as you mentioned, corn, soy, and wheat. So could you explain why these 3 choices? Why not lettuce, or why not tomatoes or anything else?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It is true that our technology platforms can address all crops, all geography, but we choose these 3 crops first because of combination of 2 things. One, yes, these are the biggest crops in terms of the acres, as well as the value, but more importantly is the latter part, going back to the nature positive outcome. So if we want to address the challenge of the environmental impact, if we can address these 3 crops, we pretty much address the majority of the environmental challenge, whereby soybean caused the largest challenge with the deforestation. So corn consumed largest amount of nitrogen fertilizer, and wheat consume quite a bit of the chemical pesticide. So if you could actually address all 3 of those, as I said, that it would help significantly in terms of the sustainability of the food system.
Mhm. So of course, the natural follow-up to this is, I'm not sure we're allowed to ask this, but what's next
Um,
after these three?
uh, we hope to be able to share later, perhaps end of this year or next year, that yes, there's another crop, and it might be one of the vegetable crops, but we'll share more when it comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sure, for sure. So I think going into the idea of like crops, I read that plant diversity is something that Inari really focuses on. So could you like please elaborate a little more on why is that important? Why is plant diversity so integral to what Inari is doing?
Yeah. So for us, going back to, again, I come back to this little seeds, that the genome is so complex, right? So how do we make sure that we bring in the diversity, bring back, even the word I use, bring back the genetic diversity? So I'll give you example that since the domestication of corn, or other crops, you can look at all. So the domestication, meaning that we bring in the seeds, this like several hundred years ago. So when you bring it in, we as an industry started to breed corn or soybeans or wheat or whatever crops. The more that we breed in, we try to select the outcome that we wish for. I'll give you example. That we may look for yield for that kind of breeding. And the breeding is about crossing male and female and look for the outcome. Along the line of trying to breed that or domesticate it, we unintentionally drop the diversity of the genetics. So if you open the genetic diversity today of corn and compare it to 100 years ago, it's actually much less complex than what we saw from 100 years ago type of genetic earlier. For example, unintentionally, we drop the gene that is tolerant to the disease out. For example, we drop the gene that tolerant to the drought in the root. So that's the whole thing, that because we didn't have the tool, right? So you cross it and then just pick by eyes on what's happening, and you take the other things out. And along that taking out, it's connected, right? It's connected to that genome, connected to the gene, certain benefit gene, and the unbeneficial genes got dropped at the same time. So therefore, the question becomes, what we're trying to do at Inari is, how do we bring back the genetic diversity, the unintentionally gene that we drop along the way of the domestication and the breeding. And the more diverse of the gene is, the better it is in terms of the outcome of the products. So that's essentially why it's so important that genetic diversity is the key part.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like your example of the corn, I think really illustrates that concept. So I think, so we've touched on Inari's product, we've touched on its deployment, we've touched on the feedback cycle in which it constantly becomes better. So I think now let's go back to like 30,000 feet in the air, right? So looking at the general ag tech sector today as a whole, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing ag tech?
I'll put two. One is still the understanding of the AgTech. It's still limited compared to other industry. So whether you put it as technology industry or you put it in terms of the food industry. So the challenge is, how do you actually put the community to learn more about the AgTech? It's because it has the element of technology, it has the element of agriculture, and it has the element of sometimes it's biotech as well. So how do you actually get it's not only people who would fall into each one of them, but the intersection to maximize the group of the people to be interested in AgTech. But the latter part, the second one is I think it's a real challenge is agriculture in general takes time in terms of the development of the solution, and its biology. You still have the biology that it takes some time for the products to come out. And if I put it in the aspect of the genetics or other things as well, to test the product in the field, and the field in the temperate area. So you have only one time a year to actually prove it, right? If it is in the temperate area. So the challenge becomes as how do we get the industry to understand the challenge of timeline of the agriculture in general. I'm using the agriculture now beyond AgTech, that it takes more time. How do we actually think about the piece of once you hit there, it goes like exponential, but how do we get people to be patient around this longer timeline than the factory building products?
Yeah.
Which if I could build on that, Skyler, further, we have a lot of discussion on this side, and how do we get to the point whereby there's a piece on the return on investment, but there's also the piece around return on innovation. There's a piece on also the return on the environment, right? So how do we view this, that it's combination of the impact that you're creating, that yes, the return on investment is very high once you hit there because it's exponential, but how do we get the to understand that the AgTech has the element of the environmental impact as well, has the element of the innovation, return on innovation as well. How do we bring in that kind of discussions?
Right. So it's definitely multiple dimensions trying to control for growth on all three. And I think, of course, Inari has made massive strides towards trying to unify all three of these ends. And as you mentioned earlier, the company's only been around for 4.5 years. But in just those short 4.5 years, it's, as I mentioned, it's become a true unicorn in the AgTech sector with its massive valuation, with its massive potential. So I guess for all of our business entrepreneur leaders in the audience, what's the secret to this success?
Oh, I think probably put two things. One is people. I think if I'm gonna say that what's the biggest asset of Inari, I would say people. And for the audience that are building the business, the most critical thing that you need to look after and you need to build is pretty much the team, right? So the secret there is essentially how do we have the diverse team? How do we actually make sure that your value is being put in as number one, and allowing the team to be innovative, be bold, and allowing the team to work collaboratively. And for me is the people is the most important thing, is the most critical thing, and is the time that I spend on the most. The latter part is purpose. So interlinked with the first point, just be clear that everything that you do link back to the purpose. So for sure, being in a startup, being in a growth company, one thing that we know for sure is we're going to see some failures along the way, right? So the question is not about only how we minimize number of failures. The more important question is how do you get back up as fast as you can? And the two reasons that you can get back up super fast is because you have the right people and everyone stick back up to the purpose, right? So that's how you get the courage to go back up. And I think that's the two important pieces on the purpose and people. Yes, we will we will be successful once we are able to address those 2 points, which I'm pretty excited about it. So I will share that with the audience here.
Yeah, super concise, but super powerful. People, purpose. And I think with that, people and purpose towards climbing up, towards growth, the final moderator question I want to end with before we get into our massive list of audience questions is, given Inari's currently skyrocketing trajectory, how would you envision Inari's impact on agriculture and the entire global food system in 30 years?
In 30 years, I would like to go back to my definition of how do we define the success of Inari, which is 100% aligned with the global food system. It's the combination of first being able to feed the world. Second is how do we do it in a way that we protect the environment. And third is the profitability to the farmers and the community. So in 30 years, but I hope to be much faster, is there's no debate anymore whether we want to feed the world or we want to take care of the environment or we want to give the profit to the farmers more. I would hope that all of us and Inari would be the big contributor of that, is all of these three can coexist. And that's when we can actually create the sustainable global food system. And in that 30 years, I hope that Inari would be just one of them to build this triangle, or the other words, pyramid, because we're going to make it more sustainable for thousands or 10,000s of years. So I hope that more people would come in, and Inari would be the voice for more entrepreneurs to come into the food system, invest together. This is not about Inari, it is about the food system. So I hope that we'll be the catalyst that innovation can make a difference. And what we are trying to do at Inari, some people call us, it's unreasonable, and we would do unreasonable things in order to have the unreasonable outcome, meaning step change. And only if you have the courage to do unreasonable things, you won't achieve unreasonable outcome. So I hope that we would be able to bring in a lot more people to have that kind of innovation and that kind of challenge, and help build the sustainable global food system together.
No, yeah, that's freaking brilliant. That's amazing. And I think one thing you really emphasize on is bring more people in, bring more people in on this massive global team. So I think the first audience question that naturally follows from this is from Nathan Beck. And he writes, agriculture is quite plummeting down in popularity with the rise of industrial and cyber bodies. However, life itself entails agriculture. So how do you envision Inari, what can Inari do to spread awareness and stress the importance of agricultural development, especially in low income and developing countries?
Yeah, we see it as it is true with question from Nathan. We see a little bit more positive trend lately during the past couple of years, that we see more bringing in more of the innovation into the agriculture. So what Inari is doing is I say that it's not only us alone. We are working together with a lot of institutions. One of them is World Economic Forum. So we're working with that and try to look into the coalition. How do we actually address the challenges of this industry more? And it is true that it's challenging. The question that we started to talk about is, how much do you define this as agriculture? It might be hard for people to understand, but when you actually address it as, is it a food system industry rather than agriculture? If you define it as food system industry would you make it broader, and would you be able to actually get more people to come in? It's still a debate. I guess I don't have the full answer towards this, but it's a journey, and I hope that all the audience here would help support this industry going forward. It's still a lot to do. It's still a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of work to do here. And I think we've covered about how to get other people into the ag tech industry, into the food system global problem. But I guess I'm focusing on you as an individual. Anya Sharma asks, was there anyone in particular who inspired you to get into the agricultural tech field?
I have more so as I have three actually in agriculture, and technology is more around. It did not exist before, right? What we are trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share with you three. One was actually my grandfather. He was actually in agriculture earlier. He was doing the rubber plantation, and he was doing aquaculture. He was a fisherman as well. So that's the part of how hard it was. And then what he was trying to do was helping the whole village there. So he was in Malaysia. So anyway, so that's one that, and his logic was, how do I do this in order to improve the community in Penang back then, right? The whole village there. So that's for me is one. The second one, which for me is something that I pledge myself that I will be in agriculture forever. The second one is extremely important. It was the corn farmer in Indonesia, whereby I visited him back around 9 years ago, and we had hybrid corn back then. And he was sharing back whereby that because of the technology that we brought in, he was able to buy the cattle for the first time, which my colleague corrected the translation of Bahasa, that what he meant was he was able to buy meat for his family for the first time. Mm-hmm. There was a shocking moment whereby how could you possibly just only technology change the livelihood and the way that a family, the line between being able to feed the family and not feeding the family for the first time. That picture still stick with me until today, and that is the piece whereby that's probably the strongest one. Why I believe in technology to help the agriculture the most. That's the strongest one. And the last one, yes, there's a person, Pam Johnson. She's a farmer in Iowa. She was involved with the National Corn Grower Association as well. And the way that I look at her as a woman dedicated to the agriculture industry and think about technologies and promote it a lot. So yeah, there are a lot of people to look up to, and those are example of the three people that I consider as the somebody that I look up to.
Yeah, all three of those people, all different aspects, and yet they're so it's just so powerful. I think I want to focus in a little bit on the second individual you mentioned, the farmer in Indonesia. So one of our delegates is asking, many farmers currently living in various countries are low income and might not have access to massive capital for many ag tech products. So what is Inari doing, or what do you envision the food system challenge doing towards making it more accessible to these low income farmers?
That's exactly what Inari is doing. And what we are trying to do is the technologies that we are talking about here, is talking about first that existing technologies take 10 to 15 years. So when you think about the product development, it's pretty costly. How do we actually get that to a much lower cost, like significantly lower cost, so then it can actually create the impact in terms of the outcome for the farmers there. Therefore, what we're doing as Inari alone is continue to do this innovation. Farmers could get access to a much more reasonable price that have much better outcome. And the second part, what we are trying to do here at Inari is we are forming this coalition with quite a number of organizations, together with the support of World Economic Forum, of how do we create 10,000 entrepreneurs to support 100 million farmers around the world for a nature positive outcome. National Corn Association is also part of that as well. So that's what we're doing beyond just Inari itself, but for industry, that we're going to need to have more innovation. And by the way, innovation, technology doesn't mean being expensive. It's the other way around. It should be treated as totally the other way around, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Innovation does not equal expensive. 10,000 entrepreneurs, 100 million farmers. And I think since we've touched on the idea of farmers and getting people on board, Tanish Gupta has a more like humanistic question. Were there any challenges in educating farmers about genetically edited seeds? And what challenges do you envision in convincing farmers to join, like your team, to join the genetically edited food system?
Frankly speaking, in fact, the gene editing part of the technologies in general, farmers are very supportive. In fact, farmer wants to see more technologies, and this is personally for me the experience as well. Whether you talk about any type of technologies, and whether it's GMO, whether it's that's more sort of like the past in terms of the history, farmers actually embrace it. Yeah. Now talking about the gene editing piece, I strongly believe that farmers are very supportive of it, because they see the benefit of not only about the productivity, but environmental impact and the profitability on farm. So that part of that equation with the farmers are rather obvious in terms of what farmers see.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Ponsi, so throughout this entire session, you've mentioned reconciling the climate problem, the productivity problem, the livelihood problem. So I think going a little bit on the the climate change section, we have a audience member who's asking, when it comes to agriculture, countries need land. Yet some obviously do not have land, or have land that's not very compatible, such as Timor-Leste in Russia. So how does Inari as a company approach these situations, and do they have a solution?
So we are still in the US. That's number one. But the question is actually not about the geography itself. The question is more around how do we make sure that the seeds can be adaptable to the land that is not the best for growing the crop at the moment. So that's exactly what we are trying to do. The part that we want to be able to help is how do we look at the seeds that can take of the water, so then it can go into the areas that is not suitable for farming at the moment. Not totally the desert, but more so of less of the water. So yes, we'll look into that. So I think and the part of the certain part of the soil may not have rich nitrogen in there. So that's the part that we're looking into it as well. How do we actually get into the reduction of the nitrogen fertilizer?
Mm-hmm. And so this is not an audience question. This is a personal question I want to ask. When I hear Inari, I don't think agriculture directly. So how did you come up, or how did Inari get its name?
Inari is a Japanese name. It is actually, it means the goddess of harvest. So that's where it comes from, and what we believe is, and it was actually rice, goddess, and how do you actually make the harvest to be more fruitful? So it's actually agriculture name.
So the goddess of the harvest. All right. All right. Yeah. Because there's so many good questions. I'm trying to find a very good one. Okay, yeah, I think going back a little bit into the journey and into the leadership section, I know you've talked a little bit about challenges you've faced, but Brian Mack asks, how does it feel to be one of the sole women who've shifted the balance of science applied to agriculture in such a male-dominated field?
How does it feel? Honored and heavy. heavy in a sense that it's the responsibility to make sure that others have opportunity as well. It's the responsibility that that I would like to actually expand it further, and want to make the success happen. But it's honored. It's honored.
Yeah, and I think following up on that, because we have a lot of these questions, because you're obviously a role model in AgTech for many of our delegates. So Shubi from India asks, of course, so you mentioned a little bit about this in our opening remarks, but what types of challenges or what other challenges have you faced, considering that you're one of the few and very first female executive leaders in AgTech?
The challenges, I think it's specifically as a female, it's probably closer to the part that I would say that it's less so of the female, actually, the challenges, I have to say. A more challenging one is the AgTech. The more challenging one is how do you actually using the AgTech position and the innovation to challenge what has been doing for the past 40, 50 years. I think that's more sort of a challenge. As a female itself, the biggest challenge was and is myself. And the reason why I use that word is this: sometimes you have the self-doubt. Yes, I'm still working through it, and I wouldn't hide it with this audience either, that it's something that you work on it a lot, and that's the biggest enemy, and that's the biggest challenge. It was worse, much worse in the past, and I feel pretty good about it now. But the piece that I would encourage everyone being on this Zoom here is that's the one that is gonna actually pull you back. No one will be able to pull you from the push that you're doing. The biggest enemy is yourself. So if you have the courage and if you believe in the purpose of what you're doing, going back to the point that no matter what happened, if you have that particular purpose, and for me is the picture of that gentleman in Indonesia is my purpose. So find your purpose, and whatever the challenge that you have, you can always overcome, but it's about yourself. Do not self-doubt yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think throughout the course of our conversation today, you've mentioned so many really powerful insights, like disregarding AgTech, just people, purpose, feedback loop, that farmer in Indonesia always keeping you driving. And of course, on the AgTech side, Inari's innovative, groundbreaking product, and just that's such a grand vision. I think with that, Ponsi, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for taking your time to share your insights with our delegates. It's truly been an honor to have you today.
Thank you so much, Skyler, and thank you so much for the opportunity.